Hello, this is Nikki in Niagara coming to you from Niagara Falls, Canada. And today I'm going to show you the 10 books, the next 10 books that I read. I am participating in the Read What You Own challenge, and I'm going to 100. Only physical books count, and only books that I purchased before January 1st, 2024. So, here we go. So the first book I read is The Chaperone. This is actually an ARC, very old ARC, and that's what the cover of the book really looks like. So this is historical fiction set in the 20s. It is about the chaperone of, oh my goodness, I've totally forgotten what her name is. Louise Brooks, that's it. She was a famous silent screen movie star, and when she first went to New York, she needed to have a chaperone with her while she went to a dance school, and this lady is her chaperone. She's middle-aged, married, spent all her life in a small town, hasn't been anywhere outside of it before, and is rather a proper lady. And for the first time she gets to see what the city's like and explore who she is and what is out there in the world, and she starts to realize that there's more to the world and more to her than just her small town life. And it was really good. I enjoyed it. It was mostly about the chaperone rather than Louise Brooks, but we did learn about her as well. Then next I read an ebook, which doesn't count for this challenge, so I'm going to skip that. Then I read this one. I read one short story a day in the morning when I have my coffee, and I've been doing that for like 10 years or more, and this was the current book that I was reading, and I finished it. I read the last story during this time period. So this is Weird Women, classic supernatural fiction by groundbreaking female writers, 1852 to 1923. And it was really good. Most short story collections end up being a 4 when you average a 3 when you average everything out. I gave this a 4. One point being that it before each story, and this is just perfect in a short story collection that I look for, is that they tell you about the author and her works. They tell you where and when, especially when the story was written, and just give you a little blurb with that information, and they do at the beginning of each story in here, which I really appreciated. So this is really good. I love Victorian fiction. Then I read Dear Child by Romy Hausman, and I gave this a 4, but what it's about is you know, I'm not remembering what this is about. It was good. It was like a popcorn thriller, you know, where you just turn in the page and turn in the page. So it was really good, but I guess it doesn't have any lasting value. I know it's about somebody who was abducted, and then 13 years later they came back into their life. So I gave that 4 stars. Then I read The Damnation Game by Clive Barker. And I like Clive Barker. I haven't read a lot of his stuff, but I've read some and I've liked it. This was horrible, though. It just really was horrible. It wasn't scary. It wasn't... the beginning was good and the ending was good. The middle part... no, actually, I should say it the other way around. The beginning and the ending were boring and lackluster. The good stuff was in the middle, but I didn't enjoy it that much, and I ended up giving this to 2. So I'm really sorry, Clive Barker. Oh yeah, this is about a prisoner who is serving life, and he offered the opportunity to go work for this really rich guy as a bodyguard, and he can do that instead of serving life. But if he screws up anywhere, he's back to his sentence, continuing on to serving life. So he does, and he ends up being all sorts of weird stuff going on, and the job is way more than he would expect at the beginning. I gave that 2 stars. Then next I read, the next book I had is this book right here, which I did not read at all, so it's not counted for anything at all. I just picked it up and I looked at it and I went, it's a cozy murder, and I had absolutely no desire to read it. So this is going to be a giveaway. And I should say with the other books which ones I'm keeping and which ones I'm not. So I'm not keeping. I was going to keep this, but since I couldn't remember it, I probably won't. This I most certainly am keeping. And this one I probably won't, since it was a 3. So I'm getting rid of lots of books off of my shelves this time. Next book I read was Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson. This is originally written in 1951. So this concerns, I would call it dark academia. The first section is about the girl's life at home before she goes to college, like that summer. And then the second section, it's divided into 3 sections. The second section is all about being at college, and so is the third, though it takes a different direction. So I would call it, it's also like her other books where it's very subtle, and you don't get any kind of like shock or whatever until the very end, just like her other books that I've read so far. And I belong to a Shirley Jackson reading club, so we're reading through all her books. So I ended up giving that 4 stars, and I will be keeping it. Next book I read was Turtle Moon by Alice Hoffman. I gave this 3 stars. I really can't remember what it's about too much. It was decent enough when I was reading it. Story of a woman and her life and her family. You know, it's kind of like a family drama. And I know what happened. Somebody in the apartment building is killed, and at the same time, the woman who's basically our main character, her 13-year-old son disappears, and also at the same time, a baby disappears. The baby of the murdered woman is missing. I should say missing rather than disappears. Same with the son. He's missing. So we get the story of all this, and at the same time the goings-on of the families and people in the apartment building and such. It's Southern fiction, so we've got some quirky characters in here, and a little bit dark, but not very. And there's a teensy bit of magical realism in here as well. I think there's like 3 chapters that are about an angel, and he has something to do with 2 of the characters in this book. And that happens in separate chapters and basically about 3 times. So if you don't like magical realism, when the chapter begins an angel, just skip that whole chapter. You won't be missing out on anything. So, but I like magical realism, so gave that a 3, but in the end I am not going to keep it. But I am going to read some more of her books. Then we have my favorite book of the month, and that is Britannia Muse by Marjorie Sharp. This was written in the 1940s, and it is historical fiction about the 1830s, mostly is where most of the meat of the story, and then at the end it takes the woman's life up to pre-World War II. And So this woman belongs to a wealthy family, but she falls in love with her drawing master who comes once a week to teach her and her friend drawing. She falls in love with him and runs away with him and marries him, and then the family disown her and she lives her life in poverty. So we learn a lot about poverty living in the Victorian era, and it really got me. I woke up in the morning thinking about these characters. I just loved it so much. And when I was finished, I went online and got another book by her because I loved it so much. This was my favorite book read of the month. I gave it 5 stars and I am keeping it. Then I read a modern classic and I hated this. It's basically a butler who goes on a road trip, first vacation in like 30 years, and he decides that he's going to I don't know, somewhere on the coast, and he's going to meet a former employee and ask her to, he got a letter from her and he feels like she was asking to come back, so he's going to go see her and ask her in person to come back. In the meantime, he is narrating the story of his former employer to us. He has a new employer now. He's an American. Things are very different at the house than they used to be during his 30 years with his previous master, I guess you would call it. And he tells us this guy's just what was going on, and it is just boring, boring, boring. I gave it 2 stars. No, I did not. I'm glad I didn't. I gave it 1 star, and I am not going to keep it. Then next I read a book by Gemma Amor, and I've read all of her back list now. I just have her last 2 books, her 2 newest books to read. She's a favorite, one of my favorite authors. She's a horror writer, and this is a story. This is a story about something supernatural. This guy's wife is out in the fields doing farming stuff, and she hears a voice calling to her, "Come!" It's the middle of winter. Come down to the river and come enjoy yourself for a change. You know, you should get some time to yourself and not working for everybody else all the time. You need to enjoy yourself. So come down to the pond and swim. And she does. And the husband, finds her dead. So then the story is about this thing that lives in the pond and the house, and the husband's left alone to raise the daughter, and it's all about that. And it was good. Not one of her best stories. It is a short story that's been published as a picture book, so you get some really nice artwork. So I gave a point for the artwork, and I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I am keeping that. Next, I read The Diving Pool by Yoko Ogawa, and I really, really enjoyed this. It's 3 novellas. They're not connected to each other, but in the first novella, this woman walks into a park and she looks at a building, and she sees the building where the swimming pool is in. Then she sees an orphanage, and then she sees what was the last story? What's the last story? College dormitory. That's it. Each one of these stories is weird. Very, very weird. And each one gets weirder than the ones before. And each one takes place in one of those 3 buildings that she saw in that first story about the pool. Great, fantastic. I can't wait to read something else by her. And I especially hope she has a short story collection available, or will be soon, because I'd love to read that. So I gave this 4 stars, and I am keeping it. And last book is The Stranger by Camilla Lackberg. I DNF'd this book, and it's a soft DNF. I found out it's the 4th book in a series, and I read up until halfway through the 2nd chapter. The 1st chapter introduces us to like a dozen people, and we're supposed to know who they are, and it's like telling us where they are and what they're doing at this stage in their life, and from the events of the previous book. So you're told what happens in the previous book. I won't remember by the time I ever come to read that book what happens, so I'm not worried. But yeah, it reinforces my previous thoughts that I should always start a series with number 1. I didn't with this one, and it got me into trouble, so I'm soft to DNFing it. I didn't give it a rating. I am keeping it because I do have book number 1 in this series, and I'm going to read that in my next this month, actually. So it'll come up probably two sets of 10 books later, if that makes any sense. So that is everything that I read in the last 10 books that I read. And thank you so much for joining me and allowing me to share this information with you. I hope you found a book or two you hadn't heard of, or an old favorite. And until next time, bye-bye!